continuation of our discussion on local industries. Today we'll be looking at salt production as one of the indigenous industries that we have in Nigeria. Now, before we start, we would like to define what salt is. And on the board we have the definition written already. We said salt was an important or essential ingredient in most diet. When you cook or you prepare your meal and you fail to add salt to it, automatically it makes the food to be tasteless. People will not enjoy the meal. So that's why we said it's an important or an essential ingredient in most diets. Your diet will contain virtually everything, but once that particular ingredient is missing, automatically it renders the food tasteless. People may not like the food unless people who don't take salt. They are the people that enjoy such meal. So in the past, our forefathers were into salt production because they knew the importance, the significance of salt. That was why they ventured into it. How were they able to get the salt? Next subtopic is sources of salt, where the salt was gotten. And on the board we identified three major sources of salt. Now the first one was what we call the mineral salt. Secondly is what we call the rain or salt water, that's from the sea. Then the third one is vegetable soil. In the course of the discussion, we will look at the processes of production of salt, and then I'll highlight more on the sources. Now, in Nigeria, so many places, so many homes were into salt production. It was not only in one locality. Most villages or communities were into salt production. So I have identified some places that were into salt production in Nigeria. Now, one of such places is what we call Nembe. Nembe is in the Niger Delta. You know, they are very close to the sea. Then we have the Ijo, the Ishekiri, the Awe, Taraba, and then Abakaliki. You can mention Lagos, you can equally mention Birnin Kebbi. All of them were into salt production. So if you are asked to mention some places that were into salt production in Nigeria, you can quickly mention some of these places and your answer would have been correct. Now, we want to go to the next subtopic, which is production process of salt. How were the salt obtained? Now, the first thing is collection of saline seawater. You know, there are times that when you fetch water from the sea and you test it, you discover that it tastes salty. Now, it is such type of water that you collect, and after collecting it, you go to the next stage, which is you heat the water or you boil the water. Now, by the time you boil the water will evaporate, leaving your salt behind. And what will be left is what we call salt cake. So that particular salt cake that is left behind, you beat it or you break it into grains or pieces or particles, and by the time you finish breaking them, your salt is ready for use. Now, apart from all these processes or the production of local soil salt by our people, as early as the 15th century, or even before the 15th century, they were equally importing salt from the north, especially through the trans-Saharan trade, in order to supplement local production. In other words, what our people were producing locally was not able to meet local demand. So they needed to import more from outside their place of production in order to supplement that which they were producing. And majorly it was coming from the North Africa through the Sahara Desert. And we talk about the Sahara Desert, we already know that the desert is a place where it hardly rains, there is a dry land, but people did not allow the desert to be a barrier. There was still interaction between the North Africans and those of us in Nigeria here. So they crossed the Sahara, the traders, the Berbers particularly, from North Africa, came with the salt in exchange to other commodities. Then by the 15th century proper, our people also imported salt from the south, that is from the Europeans. They were coming through the Atlantic Ocean, most especially when the transatlantic slave trade started. They were equally coming with salt in exchange to some other things. Then by the end of the 19th century, the cheapness and the cleanliness of the European salt caused a decline in local production. Now people relaxed because the European salt was becoming, it was common, it was cheap, and it was cleaner than what they were doing locally. So they started abandoning the production since the European ones was readily available for them to use. So that was the beginning of the decline in local production of salt in Nigeria. That's with the coming of the Europeans. Their own was cheap and it was cleaner. So our people preferred that one. So they relaxed. They were no longer going into the local production as they used to be. Now, the next thing that we want to look at is uses of salt. Uses of salt. Now, the first use of salt is that salt adds flavor or taste in food. As I said earlier, no matter how delicious your food is, no matter how you take your time to prepare the food, so long as you fail to add that little ingredient in the food, your food becomes tasteless. It does not have that flavor, so people will not enjoy that particular meal. So it adds flavor or taste to food. The second use of salt is that it was used in treating stomach ache. You know, it was a local community, and so the local medicine available to them, once you have stomach upset or stomach ache, was for them to prepare some solution of salt and give you to take. So it was used in treating stomach ache. Then the third one is that it was used in treating sore throat. That was another medicine for sore throat. Once you discover that your throat was itching, or as if you have some wounds around your throat, the local medicine man will prepare a concoction including salt and give you. And by the time you take that, you will discover that you will feel a kind of relief. So that was another importance or use of salt. The fourth one is that salt was used as toothpaste. In other words, it was used for brushing because all these modern toothpaste that we have, they were not available. So the local toothpaste that the people use in brushing their teeth, apart from using those chewing sticks to brush their teeth, they equally use salt in brushing their teeth. And there are times that when you have some cavity, some open spaces in your teeth, by the time you keep brushing with the teeth, it equally helps in treating that particular problem. The fifth one is that salt was used in preservation. And what do you preserve with salt? Of course, you preserve things like fish. You equally preserve things like meat with salt. And it will take a longer time before it spoils. So that's another importance. Even today, we still use salt to preserve some of these things. Then the sixth one is that it was used in the settlement of bride well. Well, even today, there are some tribes that still use salt. You cannot go to settle your dowry without salt. It's a necessity. Some tribes still use it up to today. But in the past, majorly, you use salt to settle the bride's well. Once you lack that particular commodity, you are not prepared for marriage yet. So it was very, very important. There was no how you omit that from the list of things given to you. Then the seventh point here is that it was used in treating hides and skin. Why? Because if you don't spread salt on the hides and the skin of animals, it will certainly spoil. Because they needed the hide and skin in order to produce some other things. Maybe in the next lesson, we equally look at leather production. That's why we lay much emphasis on the importance of hide and skin and why it needed to be preserved as well. Now, in essence, that is what the salt was used for. And by way of summary, I earlier said that salt is an important or essential ingredient in most diets, and you can't prepare your food without salt. And we look at some other sources of salt. The first one that we mentioned was mineral salt, green or what we call salt water, and the third one is what we call vegetable salt. Then we mentioned some places where salt production was carried out. We then quickly look at production processes of salt, and we rounded our discussion on salt production with the uses of salt. And so in preparing for your exams, in preparing for your WAEC, you must remember to learn the definition, the meaning of salt, and then you equally remember some of the places that were into salt production. And most importantly, you must equally memorize the production process and then the uses of salt. These are the most important things. In fact, if you will forget anything, don't forget the uses of salt, because mostly that's the question that you see even in WAEC. So you learn to memorize some of the uses of salt. Now, if you don't have any question on salt, permit me to introduce the next local industry, which was equally very, very important. And this time around, we'll be discussing what we call basically the truth. If you see carpet today, they got the technology of producing those carpets from what we call mat, because that is where the technology of producing carpet comes from. So this particular discussion will help us in some basic things. Now, what are mats? Mats are carpet-like. They are like carpets. That is what I mean by they are carpet-like, made using green leaves of raffia, or what we call dead palms, especially the young leaves. That is what they use in producing mats. The Mughal man called it PM. That is how he used his own in his own local. That's how he called it in his own local language. So it was very, very important. Don't forget that in those days, beds were very scarce. There were no mattresses like we have them today. So basically, what our people used to sleep on were the mats. That's why it's very, very important, and it was regarded as an important occupation in the pre-colonial era. So the mats, as I said, were produced commonly among the PM people. The PM are predominantly found in Gindri. We know they are very good in producing mats. Then we had the Efik. We equally have the Ibibio, the Ijo, and the Igbo. That's not all. So many communities, so many villages were into the production of mat. Of course, there were no people that don't sleep now. Everybody, once it is time to rest, you must go to sleep. And what will you sleep on? Some were leaves. But people that were wealthy around that particular time, they had the mats. So that tells you how important that particular industry was. Now, the next subtopic is what we call uses of mats. So let's look at uses of mats now. Now, the first one is that it was used as bait. That's for sleeping. People use it to rest at night. There were no some of these family beds that we have in the past. So basically what they used were the mats. And as I said in my explanation, those that were even using mats were the richest people of the community. As I said, others used leaves. In fact, some could lie down on the bare floor, just like that. So it was used as bait. The second one, it was used for, it is used for prayers by the Muslims. If you have ever entered a mosque, what you see basically are mats. In some, you see carpet, but in my explanation, I told you that mats are carpet-like. So those were the local carpets that our people had them. So the Muslims basically use the mats to spread it on the floor, and they use it to pray. It's very, very important. It's one of the uses of mats. Then the third one is that it was used as carpet. That's to cover the floor. Residential houses. I'm not talking about the mosques now. I'm talking about residential houses. People use it to decorate, just like you use carpets today to decorate your sitting room or your bedroom. That was how the local people also use mats in order to decorate their sitting rooms and their bedrooms as well. So it is not the modern people that invented the use of carpets. You can see that the technology of using carpet started even before the Europeans came So we had the technology. Then the fourth one is that mats were used for fencing some compounds. When you go to the far north, even today, when you are passing through some compounds, what you will see as the fence are mats. They use the mats to just, there are no blocks now, like the cement blocks that we have, or the mud. They had the mud, but some still prefer to use the mats to fence the compound. Don't forget that we're talking about Nigeria or industries before 1800 AD. So don't cast your mind back to the past, not what is happening now. Then the fifth one is that it's used as cotton. You know, today we have beautiful curtains, but in the past, what you see is that people will just buy mat or produce the mat and use it to hang it at the door or by the window as the curtain of their house. And it was giving them the desired secrecy or privacy that they needed. But today we have advanced from that particular stage, but the technology started right from the ancient man or the early man. Then point number 6. Mats are used for drying crops under the sun. When you spread mats on the ground, you can equally spread your crops on them and you allow them under the sun. And within a very short while, it will equally dry up. Then the last but not the least is that mats were used as seats. You know, today you have plastic chairs, some of you are sitting on benches, or in the past you visit somebody and you discover that there's nothing in the house, you will just have to sit on the mat that he has provided. Those were the seat, the executive seat then. And people enjoyed it and they enjoyed themselves like that. So when you see things happening today, it has a historical origin. So basically, that ends our discussion on mats. I will equally want to introduce the next local industry to you now, which is what we call wood carving. Wood carving. Now, what we mean by wood carving is the skill of creating carved objects or designs or figures. Carved objects, figures or designs using wood as the major raw material. That is what wood carving is. Now, today you must have seen things made of wood. So many, even the decks you are sitting on, they carved it from wood. But this particular one, I'm talking about special designs, things that the carvers will take their time, use their skills in order to produce the design that they want, or to carve out the object that they want. And as we continue the discussion, I'll mention some of the things that the carvers were able to carve out of wood. Some articles produced using wood include mortar, we have cups, spoons, stools, mugs, and the rest of them. Now all these things were carved using wood. The next thing we are going to talk about is production process. Now the first one is you cut the wood into the required shape. That's the first thing. You locate the wood. After locating the wood, you cut it into the required shape depending on what you want to carve. Secondly, you remove the bark, because when you cut down a tree, it has a bark. You cannot use the bark to carve anything, so you must remove that out first before you start carving your article. Then the third one is you carve the wood into the required pattern. That's what you want to produce. You carve it into that shape so that you take that particular shape or pattern that you want it to take. Then the last but not the least, once you are done with the carving, the next thing is you pen the finished product, and then it is ready for use. Whether to be kept in the palace, to be kept in the shrine, or for whatever purpose that you carve that object for, you will keep it there for that particular purpose. Now, the last thing that we are going to talk about under wood carving is what we call importance of wood carving. importance of wood carving. Now, one of the importance or one of the use of wood carving is that it was used in preserving history. That is our heritage. You must have heard about the festive head. You know, the festive head that we celebrate, especially in this school on a yearly basis, it was carved using wood. So, you can see that the festive head is preserving the history of the makers of that head, especially the Benin people, who were popular for such things. So it is used in preserving our history. Then the second one is that it provided domestic utensils. Domestic utensils. What are these domestic utensils? Earlier I had mentioned mortar, I had mentioned cups, I had equally mentioned spoons, as well as stools. All these things are domestic utensils, and they were products of wood carving. The third one is that objects of religious worship were produced. If you have had the privilege of entering a particular shrine, you will see objects that were carved using wood and are kept in the shrine. Only the shrine keepers or people who worship in the shrine understand what those objects stand for. But they were objects of significance. So you don't touch them anyhow. Only those that have been licensed by the gods to touch such objects would confidently enter the shrine and touch such objects. As an ordinary person, if you enter the shrine and you touch such objects, whatever the gods did to you, you call for it. Then the last but not the least is that it provided employment and wealth to the carvers. Those that were into wood carving generated a lot of wealth from the business or from the industry, and it was also a source of revenue to the entire community, because they equally pay what we call tax, especially to the king, who will collect and then keep it in the central treasury for the upkeep of the community as a whole. So it serves as employment first to the makers of the object, and then it also generated wealth to them, and the community also benefited from the labor of the wood carvers. So basically, these are the importance or use of wood carving. I think